All right, so we're going to look at the aftermath of World War One. So World War One has ended, and we got a chance to take a look at the technology of the war, experience of the soldiers. We took a look at what happened politically to the Central Powers in terms of the Ottoman Empire and Austria-Hungary being partitioned. In this lecture, we'll cover a little bit more about that kind of devastation of the war and how the various winning side countries were feeling, the Allied power countries were feeling about Germany, and how that translated into the peace treaty, the Treaty of Versailles. So we'll start with a picture. So you can see this picture here. Students in my world history class have previously seen this as a town in Belgium. Before on the left and after on the right, artillery bombardment during World War One. Just showing you these images to kind of get some scope of the devastation of the war. Here's a forest after artillery bombardment and becoming a battleground, and some more images of destruction, dead soldiers and such. More images of destruction, and a Siegfried Sassoon poem. So you can pause there and read that. And this is a question I ask my students to kind of ponder a little bit. What might life be like for the survivors of the war, the people who didn't end up dead, or perhaps just wounded physically or mentally, or didn't even fight at the war at all, but then had to deal with the consequences, the aftermath, and all of the death and destruction after the war. So the Treaty of Versailles was specifically about how Germany was going to be dealt with by the Allied powers. France had been attacked by Germany. We took a look at the Schlieffen Plan before, and Germany was seen, probably rightfully so, as the aggressor in the whole thing. They started it by attacking France through neutral Belgium. They almost captured France twice. They almost captured the capital city twice, once at the very beginning of the war and once at the close to the end when they made their final push. So France wanted Germany to be weak as possible. They didn't want to be attacked again, and they were upset, understandably so, about the destruction of their home country. The USA was on the other end of the spectrum. The USA wanted a stronger Germany. The USA kind of wanted this in order to create political stability, which is better for business. Now, the business part is important because, as we'll get to later, Germany was forced to pay a lot of money, and most of that money, even though it was being paid to France and also to Britain, in terms of like repaying the damages they caused during the war, most of that money would end up in the hands of U.S. businesses because U.S. businesses and the U.S. government supplied things to fight the war with to France and Britain on credit. So it's kind of like a transfer. So USA, of course, wanted a stronger Germany that would be able to pay its debts because most of those debts were held in the end by the United States. Britain kind of split the difference between France and Britain, or excuse me, between France and the United States. They wanted Germany that wasn't too strong, didn't want Germany to be on the offensive again, but also were afraid that a weak Germany would lead to revolutions internally, kind of like we were talking about before with Hitler. Germany was forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles and forfeit territory, slash the military, and give up their overseas colonies. The Treaty of Versailles was definitely more towards the France end of the spectrum. Germany was made very, very weak, and especially the bit about the reparations that the Germans had to pay. Here's a little cartoon. The resolution is very bad. You could Google image search Treaty of Versailles, and this is one of the things that would come up, that the Germany is supposed to be this little mouse kind of thing here, and then we have Britain, France, Italy, USA shoving this pill that says peace terms down Germany's throat, and the caption there being a tough pill to swallow. Anyhow, the Treaty of Versailles was harsh on Germany. Germany had to pay reparations. Reparations, that word means damages caused by, or repaying for the damages that you've caused. Like if you were playing baseball in the street and you hit the ball through somebody's window, you'd have to pay to replace it. That's reparations. In this case, it would be about $30 billion that the Germans had to pay, and that was in like 1918 dollars, not 2014 dollars. So if we follow out the concept of inflation, $30 billion back then would have been, we could do the math, but we won't. Much, 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 much more money, way more than the German economy created even in a whole year. So essentially, if you think about it like this, the German people, every single German person could work all day, every day at doing their jobs and give all the proceeds and all of the stuff that they create over to France and Britain and then the United States for more than a year. Right? Not feeding themselves, not paying for their own housing, not clothing themselves, not paying their own debts, not putting fuel in the car, not investing in their own businesses, just giving everything to the French and the British, and that for over a year, and it wouldn't pay the debt. So it's greater than the entire German economy for a whole year. So it was going to take a long, long time to pay off, for sure. France wanted it right now. The Treaty of Versailles also contained this idea of self-determination. Self-determination means that you get to determine your own government. Essentially, it's like democracy, right? Like people aren't going to be like invaded and conquered and ruled by some other country. Any group of people gets to vote and determine their own government, whatever form of government they want that to be. That's the idea of self-determination. And the Treaty of Versailles listed out a whole bunch of different places where that was going to happen. And it said things like, oh, the foreign troops will leave, and then the people will decide on what kind of government or how they want to organize their government. So you can see a map here. On the left-hand side is before the war. On the right-hand side is after. You can see the Austro-Hungarian Empire was split up into Austria-Hungary, Czechoslovakia. Part went into this new country, Yugoslavia. Part went into the now larger country of Romania. The country of Poland was created in between Russia, or what was now the USSR, and Germany. This little chunk right here is actually another piece of Germany, and you see how Poland kind of separates Germany in two. This was called the Polish Corridor, and it would become something of a talking point for the Nazis later. And then all of these other countries, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. These were all countries that were created in this, kind of vein of self-determination. Of course, self-determination was only for the Europeans, only for the white people. The imperialized folks, say in India, for example, they didn't get self-determination. They just got to be colonies, and if it was a German colony, it would now be a mandate of the League of Nations and essentially become a French or British colony. Vietnam is another example. Vietnamese people fought in the war, etc. So German colonies and Ottoman lands turned into European colonies, British, French, Italian, kind of, not really though, to a lesser degree. So some issues that weren't talked about or not talked about, but unresolved is that this idea of no self-determination for anybody else is like, oh, it's good for the white people, but racism was really still the rule of the day here, and the colonies could still be exploited for financial gain, and the Europeans wanted to go back to doing that now that the war was over. Italy didn't get what they wanted, which would eventually drive them into the arms of the fascist leader Mussolini, because Italy not getting to participate in any of the reparations or in any of the financial gain from the war had some serious economic problems that we'll talk about later. Russia resented the great loss of land. A lot of that they had actually given up when they signed a peace agreement with Germany previous to Germany's defeat, when Russia had their revolution, or two revolutions actually. And then one of the big part here is that, the United States, led by Woodrow Wilson, had this great big plan for, hey, let's make the peace this lasting peace, and kind of the centerpiece to this whole plan about never having to go to war, especially in a world war again, was this organization called the League of Nations, which is meant to be very much like what we have today and called the United Nations. So it was negotiated for. It went into the treaty. Woodrow Wilson had to give up a lot to get it. He negotiated with France. Germany had some severe military and economic restrictions, had to pay those reparations and all that kind of stuff. But Woodrow Wilson ended up saying, oh, that's okay as long as we have the League of Nations. But the U.S. Congress refused to join the League of Nations because the president can't just do that all by himself. The U.S. Congress has to vote on it too, and they said, nope, we're not getting involved in that. So this kind of global police force, this community of nations that was supposed to keep war from ever breaking out again, was powerless. And we'll see later how they were powerless and how they were tested, and they didn't respond. Here's a cartoon that shows the League of Nations, Belgium, France, England, Italy, and then USA being the keystone, and Uncle Sam sitting idly by, refusing to place the keystone in the bridge and complete the project. The Middle East is partitioned. You can see here the Ottoman Empire in kind of dark red color, and this part of the Ottoman Empire was divided up: French, British. These are the boundaries that the French and the British drew for that territory. So the French and the British were in control, and they made this thing called the Sykes-Picot Agreement to set up the countries of Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, Iraq, Kuwait, which you can see in the middle here is Saudi Arabia, and that you can see this is the same map or the map of the same area from 2012. Not much has changed border-wise. We go back and forth between the two. So that's kind of the legacy of those borders and the conflict in the Middle East definitely stems, at least in part, from the way that the peace was settled at the end of World War I. And then lastly, some social changes. There were more rights for women in the United States because of the way that the women were able to participate in the war effort, in manufacturing roles and things like that. We saw the 19th Amendment get passed in 1919 and ratified by enough states to make it a constitutional amendment in 1920, and that gave women the right to vote. Socialism gained popularity in part because people thought that the business interests that were very powerful in controlling the government and war profiteering and such were doing it wrong. So socialism became popular as an alternative to the form of government or forms of government that had led to World War I. The police cracked down heavily on socialists in Western Europe and the USA, in part because they didn't want the Russian Revolution to spread. We'll talk about the Russian Revolution soon. And that's it. Thanks.